Behind these walls sit over 700 condemned men, but 8 names stand above the rest. What makes a criminal so dangerous that even hardened inmates fear them? Some have taken dozens of lives. Others have destroyed entire families. A few have committed acts so horrific they changed the law itself. One man told a court his only regret was not killing more police officers. Another convinced children to participate in their own deaths. A third slowly poisoned 3 women, one by one, for insurance money. These aren't your typical murderers. These are predators who shocked even veteran detectives. Men whose crimes were so brutal, so calculated, that they earned a permanent home on America's largest death row. By the end of this video, you'll understand why these 8 men represent the darkest corners of human nature. The question is, are you prepared for what you're about to hear? Before we begin, let me know in the comments where you're watching from tonight. Whether you're alone in your room or with friends, these stories might make you double-check your locks. October 1993, a slumber party becomes a nation's nightmare. 12-year-old Polly Klaas was having friends over at her home in Petaluma, California. 3 girls, giggling and playing games in her bedroom. A normal Friday night. Until a stranger appeared in the doorway. Richard Allen Davis was no ordinary criminal. Born in 1954, his rap sheet read like a manual for violence. Burglary, robbery, assault, kidnapping. For decades, he had been in and out of the system. Psychiatrists warned he was dangerous. Probation officers said he needed to stay locked up. But the system kept letting him go. Davis had a history with children that should have terrified anyone paying attention. He had violent tendencies that grew worse with each release. He admitted to hearing voices telling him to hurt people. Yet somehow, plea bargains and legal loopholes kept putting him back on the streets. That October night, Davis entered the Klaas home with a knife. He tied up 2 of the girls, then took Polly. Her friends, terrified and bound, could only watch as she disappeared into the darkness. What followed was the largest search effort in California history. Volunteers combed through forests and fields. The FBI joined local police. Polly's face appeared on television screens across America. For 2 months, the nation held its breath. Davis was finally caught during a routine traffic stop. Police found evidence in his car that would seal his fate. But Polly was already gone. The details of what happened to that little girl shocked even veteran detectives. Davis showed no remorse during his trial. In fact, he seemed to enjoy the attention his crime had brought him. But Polly's death did more than destroy one family. It changed California law forever. The public outrage was so intense that lawmakers passed the 3 strikes law, ensuring repeat offenders like Davis would never see freedom again. Davis sits on death row today, more than 30 years later. He became the face of why some criminals can never be trusted with a second chance. But Davis wasn't the only one whose crimes changed legislation forever. Sometimes reality becomes more terrifying than fiction. December 7, 1982, Francis and Eileen Harbitz, an elderly couple in Fullerton, California, were spending a quiet evening at home. They had no idea that death was about to knock on their door. Richard Delmer Boyer was born in 1958. By his early 20s, he was already drowning in addiction. PCP, alcohol, whatever he could get his hands on. The drugs weren't just changing his behavior, they were destroying his mind. That night, Boyer was high on PCP when he watched the horror movie Halloween 2. According to Boyer, the film triggered something in his brain. He claimed he had a violent flashback, believing he was under attack. In his drug-fueled state, he grabbed a knife and left his house. The Harbitz couple never stood a chance. Boyer broke into their home and attacked them with a brutality that shocked investigators. Francis Harbitz was stabbed 24 times, his wife Eileen 19 times. The scene was so bloody that experienced detectives struggled to process what they were seeing. But Boyer didn't just kill them. He robbed them too. Police found him with the victims' wallets, along with clothing stained with their blood. The evidence was overwhelming. However, Boyer's defense team tried something that had never been attempted before in an American courtroom. They claimed that Halloween Chew was responsible for the murders. The movie, they argued, had triggered Boyer's psychotic episode. For the first time in legal history, a horror film was submitted as evidence in a murder trial. The first trial ended with a hung jury. Some jurors believed Boyer's story about the movie. Others thought it was just an excuse for cold-blooded murder. The case went to retrial, then another retrial. Legal challenges over coerced confessions and Miranda rights violations dragged the proceedings on for years. Eventually, the courts had enough. Boyer was convicted and sentenced to death. His attempts to blame Hollywood for his crimes had failed, but his case set a precedent that lawyers still reference today. Boyer sits on San Quentin's death row, still claiming a movie made him kill. The Harbitz family knows better. They know that Boyer chose to take drugs. Boyer chose to pick up that knife. And Boyer chose to end 2 innocent lives. While Boyer blamed movies, our next killer had no such excuse. We're just getting started. The next case involves a killer so methodical, he kept a scorecard of his victims. What you've heard so far is nothing compared to what's coming. A cult leader who convinced children to die for him. A poisoner who killed 3 women for insurance money. A gang member who executed an entire family in the wrong house. A cop killer who bragged about his crimes in court. And a predator whose execution has been delayed for over 30 years. Here's a challenge for you. Can you guess which killer had the highest victim count before we reveal it? Drop your guess in the comments right now. 6 more killers. Dozens more victims. And crimes so disturbing they'll make Boyer's movie defense look like child's play. Marriage should be until death do us part. But what if death comes too early? Steven David Catlinn was born in 1944 and adopted as an infant in Kern County, California. He dropped out of high school and started down a path of petty crime. Forgery, theft. Nothing too serious at first. But Catlin had bigger plans. Between 1976 and 1984, 3 women in Catlin's life died under mysterious circumstances. His 4th wife, Joyce, his adoptive mother, Martha, his 5th wife, Glenna Kay. All 3 deaths looked natural at first. Pneumonia, strokes, sudden illness. The kind of things that happen to people sometimes. But investigators started noticing a pattern. Every time someone close to Catlin died, he collected insurance money. Joyce's death brought him thousands. Martha left him her estate. Glenna Kay's life insurance policy was substantial. For 8 years, Catlin had been turning tragedy into profit. The breakthrough came when forensic scientists decided to take another look at tissue samples from the victims. What they found changed everything. All 3 women had been poisoned with paraquat, a deadly herbicide used to kill weeds. Paraquat is a particularly cruel way to murder someone. It causes slow, agonizing organ failure that looks like natural illness. The victims would have suffered for days, maybe weeks, never knowing they were being killed by someone they trusted. Catlin thought he was smart. He probably believed that by spacing the murders years apart, no one would connect them. He was wrong. Police searched his garage and found the smoking gun, a bottle of paraquat with Catlin's fingerprints all over it. He had kept the murder weapon right there in his home, like some kind of trophy. The trial revealed a man completely without conscience. Catlin had married these women, gained their trust, then slowly poisoned them to death for money. He watched them suffer, comforted them as they died, then collected their life insurance policies. Catlin was convicted of multiple counts of murder. The jury saw through his act and sentenced him to death. He's been on San Quentin's death row ever since, still maintaining his innocence despite overwhelming evidence. What makes Catlin particularly disturbing is his patience. These weren't crimes of passion. They were calculated business transactions where human lives were the currency. Catlin killed for money, but our next killer had far darker motivations. 61 cryptic entries in a notebook, each one a life destroyed. Randy Steven Kraft, looked like anyone you might work with. Born in 1945, he was a clean-cut computer programmer living in Southern California. Polite, intelligent, seemingly normal. But Kraft was hiding a secret that would make him one of America's most prolific serial killers. Between 1972 and 1983, young men started disappearing along California's freeways. Hitchhikers, runaways, men walking alone at night. They would vanish without a trace, their bodies found days or weeks later in remote locations. Kraft had a method. He would pick up these vulnerable young men, offer them alcohol or drugs like Valium, then drive them to secluded areas. What happened next was too horrific for most people to comprehend. Kraft didn't just kill his victims. He tortured them first. The breakthrough came in 1983 when police pulled over Kraft's car for erratic driving. In the passenger seat was a young Marine named Terry Gambrell. He was unconscious and dying. In Kraft's car, investigators found something that would crack the case wide open. A handwritten list with 61 entries. The list was written in a code that only Kraft understood. Stable, Twiggy, Angel. These weren't random words. They were Kraft's way of keeping track of his victims. Each entry represented a human being whose life he had taken. Prosecutors called him the Scorecard Killer because of that list. They believed each entry corresponded to a murder. If they were right, Kraft had killed more people than Ted Bundy, John Wayne Gacy, and Jeffrey Dahmer combined. The trial was a nightmare for everyone involved. It lasted 13 months and cost Orange County millions of dollars. Witness after witness testified about Kraft's methods. Forensic experts explained how he had mutilated his victims. The jury heard details so disturbing that some members broke down crying. Kraft was convicted of 16 murders, but investigators believe the true number is much higher. They think he may have killed as many as 60 young men across California, Oregon, and Michigan. Some of those cases are still being investigated today, more than 40 years later. What makes Kraft particularly terrifying is how normal he seemed. He held down a steady job, maintained relationships, lived a seemingly ordinary life. But on weekends, he would drive the freeways looking for victims. Kraft sits on death row today, still refusing to explain what his scorecard meant. Families of missing young men from the 1970s and 1980s still wonder if their loved ones were among his victims, while Kraft hunted strangers. Our next case shows how evil can hide within families. Before we continue, I need to warn you. This next case involves disturbing family abuse that some viewers may find difficult to hear. Marcus Wesson was born in 1946, but by 2004, he had created something that defied all understanding of family. In Fresno, California, Wesson controlled a household where he was worshipped as God himself. Wesson didn't just lead a family, he created a twisted kingdom where his word was absolute law. He taught his children and nieces that he was divine, that Jesus was a vampire, and that death was preferable to separation from him. For years, Wesson had been systematically abusing the children in his care. He forced them into relationships they were too young to understand. He homeschooled them with his own warped version of religion. He controlled every aspect of their lives, from what they ate to what they believed. The children lived in fear and isolation. They had been so completely manipulated that they believed Wesson's twisted teachings were normal. Some were as young as 8 years old when the abuse began. March 12, 2004. Family members who had escaped Wesson's control arrived at his Fresno home. They wanted to take the children away from him. They knew what was happening inside that house, and they were determined to stop it. Wesson refused to let them go. Police were called to the scene. What started as a family dispute quickly became a tense standoff. For hours, officers tried to negotiate with Wesson. They could hear movement inside the house, but Wesson wouldn't let them in. When police finally entered the home, they found a scene that would haunt them forever. 9 bodies were discovered in a back room filled with antique coffins. 7 children and 2 adults, all dead from gunshot wounds. Each victim had been shot through the eye in what investigators called execution-style murders. The youngest victim was just 1 year old. Wesson emerged from the house, covered in blood, claiming he had tried to save everyone. But investigators knew better. The evidence showed that Wesson had orchestrated the entire massacre. What makes this case particularly disturbing is that Wesson had convinced some of the children to participate in their own deaths. His psychological control was so complete that they believed dying for him was an act of love. Wesson was convicted of 9 counts of first-degree murder and multiple counts of sexual abuse. The trial revealed decades of manipulation, control, and systematic abuse. He was sentenced to death and remains on San Quentin's death row. The Wesson case shocked America because it showed how completely one person can control others through fear and twisted religion. Wesson didn't just kill his victims, he destroyed their ability to think for themselves, from family destruction to targeting law enforcement. October 24, 2014, Sacramento County. A routine Friday morning becomes a war zone. Luis Bracamontes was born in Mexico in 1970. By 2014, he had been deported from the United States twice for drug offenses and other crimes. But Bracamontes kept coming back. He had developed a hatred for American law enforcement that would soon explode into violence. That morning, Bracamontes armed himself and set out with one goal: kill as many police officers as possible. His first target was Deputy Danny Oliver. Oliver was investigating reports of stolen property when Bracamontes approached his patrol car and opened fire. The deputy was shot multiple times and died at the scene. He had been with the Sacramento County Sheriff's Department for 15 years. But Bracamontes wasn't finished. He stole Oliver's patrol car and continued his rampage. His next stop was a motel where he fired at civilians before driving to another location. At a busy intersection, Bracamontes encountered Detective Michael Davis Jr. of the Placer County Sheriff's Department. Davis, a 26-year veteran of law enforcement, tried to stop the stolen patrol car. Bracamontes shot him through the windshield. Detective Davis died from his wounds, leaving behind a wife and children. The shooting spree continued for hours. Bracamontes wounded another deputy and shot at a civilian during his escape attempt. He was finally captured after a manhunt that involved multiple law enforcement agencies. What happened next shocked everyone who witnessed it. During his trial, Bracamontes showed absolutely no remorse for his crimes. He shouted profanities at the judge, made obscene gestures at victims' families, and hurled racial slurs at court officers. When given the chance to speak, he said his only regret was not killing more police officers. Bracamontes seemed to enjoy the attention his crimes had brought him. He laughed during testimony about his victims' deaths. He interrupted proceedings with outbursts and crude comments. His behavior was so disruptive that he had to be removed from the courtroom multiple times. The case became politically charged because of Bracamontes' immigration status. He had been deported twice, but returned illegally both times. Politicians on both sides used his crimes to argue for their immigration policies. But for the families of Deputy Oliver and Detective Davis, politics didn't matter. 2 good men were dead because of Bracamontes' hatred and violence. In 2018, after a lengthy trial marked by his constant disruptions, Bracamontes was sentenced to death. He showed no emotion when the sentence was read. He had gotten exactly what he wanted: maximum attention for maximum cruelty. Bracamontes remains on death row at San Quentin, still unrepentant for his crimes. He represents a type of criminal who kills not for money or passion, but simply because he wants to cause pain. While Bracamontes showed no remorse, our next cases revealed different psychological profiles. Our final 2 cases show how violence can destroy innocent lives in completely different ways. 1984. Los Angeles was a war zone. Gang violence was tearing apart entire neighborhoods, and the Rollin 60s neighborhood Crips were among the most feared. Tiequon Aundray Cox, known as Lil Fee, was just 18 years old when he became part of that world. Cox and his crew were looking for revenge. A drug deal had gone wrong, and they wanted payback. They had an address, they had guns, and they thought they knew where to find their enemies. They were wrong. The house they targeted belonged to Deborah Alexander, the mother of former NFL player Kermit Alexander. 4 innocent people were inside that night: Deborah Alexander, her daughter Deetra, and 2 young children, Damon Bonner and Damani Garner Alexander. Cox and his associates opened fire on a family that had nothing to do with their gang dispute. All 4 victims died in what became one of the most senseless murders in Los Angeles history. The intended targets lived in a different house entirely. Cox was convicted of 4 counts of first-degree murder and sentenced to death in 1986, but his violence didn't end with his conviction. In 1988, while on death row, Cox stabbed fellow inmate Stanley Tookie Williams, the co-founder of the Crips gang. The attack reflected ongoing gang tensions even within San Quentin's walls. Cox also tried to escape. In 2000, he and 2 other inmates attempted to breach San Quentin's perimeter fence. They were caught before they could gain freedom, but the incident showed that Cox remained dangerous even behind bars. Cox represents the tragedy of gang violence. 4 innocent people died because an 18-year-old couldn't control his anger and got the wrong address. Now to our final case. Albert Greenwood Brown Jr. was born in 1954, but it was his actions in 1980 that earned him a place among California's most notorious criminals. 15-year-old Susan Jordan was walking in Riverside, California, when Brown abducted her. What happened next was methodical and brutal. Brown sexually assaulted and murdered the teenager, then left her body where it would be found. The investigation that followed was thorough and damning. Police found Susan's belongings in Brown's home. They discovered blood-stained clothing that matched the crime scene. Footprint evidence connected Brown to the location where Susan's body was found. Brown was convicted of first-degree murder with special circumstances in 1982 and sentenced to death. His case seemed straightforward until the legal battles began. For decades, Brown's attorneys have challenged his death sentence. They've questioned lethal injection protocols, argued ineffective counsel, and raised constitutional issues. In 2010, Brown was actually scheduled to be the first inmate executed at San Quentin in nearly 5 years. But the execution was stayed by federal courts. The delays aren't because anyone doubts Brown's guilt. The evidence against him was overwhelming. The delays come from ongoing legal and ethical debates about how the death penalty is carried out in California. Brown remains on death row today, more than 40 years after murdering Susan Jordan. His case represents the complexity of California's death penalty system, where sentences are rarely carried out despite overwhelming evidence of guilt. Both Cox and Brown show how young criminals can commit acts that destroy multiple lives. Cox was 18 when he killed 4 people. Brown was in his 20s when he murdered Susan Jordan. Age didn't make their crimes any less devastating. 8 men, 8 different paths to evil. What do these cases tell us about criminal behavior? Davis was a career criminal whose violence escalated with each release. Boyer blamed drugs and movies for his actions. Catlin killed methodically for money. Kraft appeared normal while hunting victims for over a decade. Wesson used religion to control and destroy his own family. Bracamontes targeted law enforcement out of pure hatred. Cox's gang violence destroyed innocent lives through mistaken identity. Brown's crime was calculated predation on a child. Each case is different, but patterns emerge. Childhood trauma, substance abuse, escalating violence, and most importantly, repeated failures by the system to recognize the danger these men posed. These crimes didn't just destroy lives, they changed laws. Davis's case created California's 3-strikes law. Boyer's defense opened new discussions about mental health and media influence. Wesson's case led to better training for recognizing cult-like abuse. Each tragedy forced society to examine how we identify and stop dangerous individuals. Today, all 8 men sit on San Quentin's death row. Some have been there for decades. The appeals continue, the legal challenges drag on, and the executions rarely happen.